Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, iPad Proficiency Check. My name is Chris McGonigal, and I'll be your facilitator today as we cover a very detailed topic, how best to utilize an iPad in aviation. Today's presenter, Bret Koebbe, will cover a large range of features, technical specs, and how the ForeFlight EFB can make life easier on the flight deck. All participants' microphones are muted, but we will have a question feature available that I'll be addressing as Bret presents. Any questions that are over my head, we will save for the Q&A portion during the conclusion of today's webinar. Today's webinar is approved for Wings credit. And a quick reminder that today's webinar is a part of Sporty's virtual air show series, and we'd cordially like to invite you to stop by sportys.com/airshow for future webinar registration, product specials, contests, and other promotions we look forward to sharing with customers in lieu of Oshkosh. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube page, along with all of our previous webinars. So without further ado, Bret, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us today for this iPad presentation. We have a lot to cover. A quick background on me. Again, my name is Bret Koebbe. Work here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. There's a nice view of our airport in the summertime. Lots of activity here this summer. Unfortunately, we will not be going to Oshkosh, as I'm sure many of those here today are disappointed as well, but our goal here is to still bring many of the educational topics that we'd be presenting at Oshkosh and AirVenture to the customers and pilot community. And one of the most popular topics we continue to see and get a lot of interest in is flying with the iPad. It's a very high-tech accessory, not made for aviation, but I think it's affected pilots and how we go about our aviation missions, how we manage our cockpit. It's affected that more than really any other consumer device out there. So there continues to be interest in that. It's really become one of those products that every student pilot seems to buy now as well as they begin their flight training. I also am editor of a website called iPadPilotNews.com, which I'll talk about more here in a minute. From an aviation standpoint, I'm an ATP flight instructor. I also run our video department and app development department here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. I've been doing this for about 20 years now, in addition to flight instructing. Fly everything from experimental RV aircraft up through in a corporate flight department and a Cessna Citation, and use the iPad in all those different aircraft. So I have a wide variety of experience, again, everything from GA, two-seat airplanes up into the corporate and professional environment. And I've learned a lot over the years and want to share a lot of that with the group here today, how to use the iPad more efficiently. And kind of the underlying theme throughout this is how to use the iPad as your digital co-pilot, with an emphasis on a lot of us are flying single pilot. And we can use the iPad as almost a electronic tool in the essence of a digital co-pilot to assist us. I also write for Flying Magazine. You may have seen some of my articles there over the past about 5 years. Write maybe 3-4 times a year. Try to have a focus on technology, again, topics like this. So check out Flying Magazine as well for some of my articles. So quick rundown, we have a lot to cover. I think we scheduled this webinar for about an hour. I'll probably go a little bit longer because I do have a lot of information to share. So if I do go long, I'll give that kind of call out at 3 o'clock. Again, the presentation is being recorded, so you can come back and check the part you missed later if you do have obligation later this afternoon. Quick rundown of what we're going to cover. And again, this is going to go from beginner-ish type topics into more advanced topics and a lot of in between throughout. So if you're a brand new pilot, or brand new to the iPad, this is a good presentation. If you've been flying with the iPad since 2010, like I have, it's also a great presentation because you're going to find there's so many different things that have changed and techniques and accessories, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about the iPads available if you are looking to purchase one. iPad flying strategies. Again, these are things that I've learned over the last 10 years flight instructing and flying professionally that I can pass along in terms of best practices for using the iPad in the cockpit. Again, that digital co-pilot theme, and that's really been aided recently by app developments on the Garmin pilot side, ForeFlight, that have allowed us, the apps to become a lot smarter and catch us if we're not doing something properly or possibly wandering into airspace we shouldn't. So a lot of themes there. And lastly, data link weather. I think that's another hot topic item, and really what propelled the iPad into the forefront was the ability to connect the iPad to affordable subscription-free data link ADS-B receivers. So we'll cover what the options are there and some best practices for using that. I mentioned iPad Pilot News. We write about 2 to 3 articles per week there. Have been doing this again since really 2010. So we have quite an extensive database of articles, videos, tips, etc. I highly recommend you check out that site, bookmark it. When you go on there, you'll find that we have an email newsletter sign up. So I'd encourage you to sign up with your email. Every 2 weeks, we'll send out all the latest tips. This is not a sales site, no obligations. It's just a great resource for pilots that we like to share the information with pilots that we learn. And basically everything that I cover here today probably has an article written on iPad Pilot News, and is a great search feature. So if you hear a topic, again, because we're going to bounce around a lot, not spend a whole lot of time on any one given topic, go to iPad Pilot News later, search for that topic, and you will find a wealth of information written on it, and probably some videos as well to give you more information. Now, Chris mentioned we're going to give ForeFlight tips, and that's true. I'll probably use ForeFlight as an example for a lot of the teaching points throughout the presentation today. If you're not a ForeFlight user, don't worry, this is not a ForeFlight presentation. But I do want to bring up that our John Zimmerman, a colleague of mine here, and Phil Inman from ForeFlight just presented a ForeFlight webinar yesterday through our Sporty's webinar series, covering what's new and advanced features in ForeFlight. So if typically at Oshkosh, I know a lot of pilots like to visit the ForeFlight presentations to learn all about what's new in the app. And ForeFlight tends to be more active in the summertime in terms of new features, new releases. I highly recommend you check out that ForeFlight webinar from yesterday, which is available on the Sporty's YouTube channel. A great resource. And it might fill in some blanks, again, if I don't go into enough detail due to time constraints on the ForeFlight features you're looking for. Okay, so let's start with the iPad itself. This is the piece of hardware that we are going to obviously purchase and use for the flight deck. There's a wealth of iPads available right now, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing, because there are obviously more selections, more options to choose from. Now, on the other side, that means we have more options. We have the iPad mini all the way up through a full-size 13-inch iPad. On the left-hand side is the iPad Pro 11-inch, probably the most capable product out there. It has the most screen real estate, also the most expensive. So that's one of the things you want to consider. It's kind of the price-value relationship when you're considering the product. On the far right side is the budget iPad. They call it this the iPad now. It's a 10.2-inch diagonal screen. And in the middle is the iPad Air. As you can see, it's a 10.5-inch screen. Pretty similar footprint to the iPad Pro 11, just a little bit bigger than the entry-level iPad. It has a little bit faster processor, a little more features. Again, that comes at a premium in terms of pricing. So here's kind of a better breakdown using a simpler graphic to explain what's going on there. On the far left-hand side, again, is that iPad Pro 11-inch. That starts at $799, which is probably a little steep for a lot of pilots who are just looking for a basic chart viewer in the airplane. I'll point out the iPad Pro, which is what I use in my flying, is nice if you're using it outside of aviation. Let's say you're going to do some photography, video editing, maybe some higher performance gaming, maybe as a productivity tool, as a laptop replacement. There's a lot of value there as a laptop tool as well, in addition to your electronic flight bag in the cockpit. There's also a 12.9-inch version of the iPad Pro available, even more expensive. Unless you're flying a really large airplane or really have a need for a really, really big screen, that's probably going to be a little bit overkill for most pilots in the airplane. Kind of that sweet spot in terms of pricing, I think, is the iPad Air, that 10.5-inch that starts at $499. A good mix of high quality features, good camera, good screen, fast processor, but not at that premium price. Now, at the same time, I will say the $329 price on the iPad 10.2-inch really is a great value, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're looking to get into this and just want the full 10-inch screen, no frills, I have absolutely no reservations about recommending that model as well. The only thing I'll say about any of those when considering the three larger sizes is just make sure to consider the 64 gigabyte size as a minimum, which really comes down to play if you're looking at that right 10.2-inch iPad screen there, which is either offered at 32 or 128 gigabytes. I've seen time and time again pilots not purchase enough memory storage space up front, and then they're kicking yourself later. Say it's ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot releases new database, new features that requires more memory. And again, you're probably going to use this product outside of aviation, so you want to have room for your photos, documents, that kind of thing. Now, thinking those three, the 10 to 11-inch size kind of as one grouping, the other size is the iPad mini, which honestly I think most pilots really prefer, and what I've seen in general aviation cockpits, which is even a better value given its price point, starting at $399. It's a smaller screen, but it's also a very high performance processor. Apple renewed that product last year with a newer version. a much needed refresh with the fast modern A12 processor. Includes that anti-reflective screen coating, so it's very sunlight readable in the cockpit. And what we're looking at there on the right-hand picture is the Mini in a Cessna 172. And what I really like about that, it fits really well in different parts of the cockpit. So especially pilots in smaller aircraft, maybe a 10-inch iPad's a little bit too big on the knee board. They can typically find a space with a suction cup mount or maybe a yoke mount to fit the iPad Mini and not block their instruments or not interfere with the flight controls. Also has Touch ID for the home button, which, as funny as it sounds, it didn't have that a couple years ago. It just had the regular non-secure button, so you have that in there. Supports the Apple Pencil. And if you have a previous generation Apple iPad Mini, it's an easy upgrade because it's the exact same footprint. So you can use your same knee board, same mount if you already have one. So I'd really encourage you to try that product out. I believe it's $499 to get the upgraded memory, upgraded storage, and you've got a really nice iPad product for the cockpit. This is one of those things I think it really helps to go see them in person. Again, if you are considering to purchase one or considering an upgrade, to compare the screen sizes and really see what feels best to you. If you're anywhere near us at Sporty's, we're in the Cincinnati area. I also encourage you to fly out. We have sample mock-ups of all the iPads and different knee boards and accessories, so you can take it out to your airplane like you were at Oshkosh, for example, and try it out. So visit us here at the I-69 airport in Cincinnati, and we'd love to show you the different options there. Now, again, I come back to the iPad Pro 11-inch, what I consider the best overall performer. It's also the most expensive, but there is, again, some good value in the more higher performance features. It does have the fastest processor available. So in aviation, in terms of what we're using ForeFlight Garmin Pilot, all the processors now are going to be more than capable to support the features we need in our iPad apps. So considering data link weather, terrain, sectionals, IFR approach charts, etc., there's no processor out there that can't support all the features that they offer. What you're going to find, though, is apps start to add multitasking, like ForeFlight recently did, so that you can run two apps simultaneously, say ForeFlight and a checklist application, or ForeFlight and an E6B application. That is going to take more processor. So if you do prefer to multitask or do prefer to have two applications open simultaneously, you may want to consider one of these higher performance products. This has Face ID for authentication and unlocking it, which is what many of the newer iPhones use, which I found works pretty well. A lot of pilots were concerned initially that might be an issue in the cockpit in terms of unlocking it with a headset. If you do have that issue, which I don't, but if you do have an issue unlocking it with your face, of course, you can use the typical passcode to unlock the product. And it also supports the Apple Pencil 2nd generation, which has some nice writing features and charging features. So what we're looking at here is 172. I've got an iPad Pro 11-inch on the left and an iPad Mini on the right. You'll find both are very easily readable in the cockpit at that viewing distance in your lap, as if it were on a knee board or possibly on the yoke. Again, it comes just down to preference and your size and what's best for you. Now, a couple things I'll point out. When you move to the iPad Pro models, they use a USB-C charger, which is the charger on the far left. It's kind of the next generation USB product and what a lot of accessories are using. GoPro uses USB-C, Sentry, ADS-B receiver, Stratus. A lot of products are transitioning to that. I just pointed out because it is something that you want to be aware of as you move from the other iPad models that use the traditional Lightning connector. One benefit, as I'll mention at the bottom in the words in blue there, the latest iPads support what is called fast charging. So in the box, when you buy your iPad, you'll get a 10 to 12 watt charger, most likely a 5 watt charger if you're an iPad Mini. What you can do is actually purchase an upgraded charger, whether it's the Apple brand. There's also a lot of third-party manufacturers that make them as well, that offer what's called fast charging. The technical term is actually called power delivery, or PD. You'll see that as a label or name on the actual charging device. But it'll actually allow the product to charge up to 50% in just 30 minutes. So it's a great thing to have in your flight bag, so you had to divert or you needed some quick power. If you have maybe a 110 volt accessory in your airplane, to deliver an increased charging percentage in a faster amount of time. Again, that's available on the iPad Pro, that new iPad Air, the new iPad Mini. So if you are looking for faster charging, or maybe if you travel a lot, it could be something you want to upgrade and use with your newer iPhone as well. But again, look for that power delivery label on the fast charging options. Apple's on the 2nd generation Pencil. People either love these or they hate them. I think I'm kind of indifferent on this. I still, as much as I use the iPad, still write pen and pencil sometimes for clearances, just because I'm used to that. But if you are accustomed to the stylus concept and like the idea of using an Apple Pencil product for clearances or to manipulate the screen, this is a good option here. And it's kind of neat too, because it actually magnetically clips to the top of the iPad Pro, as you can see there in the top above the Scratchpad, and charges the pencil as well. Just be careful when you're looking at the Apple Pencil, because there is the 1 and the 2, and not all iPads support the Apple Pencil 2, so make sure you're lining up your selection there. In Apple's effort to bring the iPad more in line as a laptop replacement, in the latest release, they brought out a keyboard with a trackpad option, again, converting your iPad into more of a full-featured productivity tool. Not sure it's going to be a real useful tool in the cockpit, but again, if you would like to have your iPad be your all-in-one everything laptop and computer, again, kind of for that value proposition to use it in different places, there is a keyboard option available from Apple now, again, with that trackpad, so that you could interact with apps and manipulate the apps more efficiently. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit of background here a minute. So the iPad debuted in 2010. And at that time, and I remember with Sporty's here, we were all flying with paper charts, and a couple airplanes on the airport had electronic flight bags from WSI that had some charts. They typically ran Windows PC software, which I'm not sure about you, but back in 2010, I wouldn't feel comfortable relying on a PC and Windows to display my charts, to make sure they'd always be there, to make sure they were reliable. So we were kind of hesitant. We kind of looked at Kindle. They had the Paperwhite product, and there was a lot of products coming from overseas that displayed aviation charts relatively reliably. They had low power draw, but we still really weren't happy then. And so when Apple announced the iPad in 2010, pilots kind of looked at this as the holy grail product that we had been waiting for, an all-in-one consumer product. Had a 10-inch bright screen, had good memory, was responsive, was reliable. I think reliability was really what was most important at that point. Again, we had a product we could take in the airplane and depend on it for charts. So pilots began buying the iPads up very quickly. At the same time, Garmin, ForeFlight, WingX, et cetera, developed aviation apps that allowed us to display our charts on there. So we had a solution that worked really well in the airplane. And because we're flying under Part 91, we didn't need FAA approval to start using that product. So word spread, and pilots were buying iPads. And that's actually the next year we started this presentation, or one very similar to this, and teaching pilots how to fly to use the iPad in the cockpit. So us Cessna pilots, us Piper pilots, we were the first ones to use it. But it's kind of the Wild West. We had to develop our own protocols. We talked on chat rooms and forums, that kind of thing. Sporties, we adopted it quickly. We tried to do as much education as possible, provide accessories for pilots. Well, then we looked at our airline counterparts, and they looked at it and said, wow, this is great. You know, we're using very expensive, outdated technology for the same purpose. But of course, in the airline world, they have to go through regulatory issues and approvals. And they came to and looked at general aviation, I think, and saw how we were using it, and took some of our best practices, and then eventually brought it into the professional world. So today in 2020, just about every airline I know and corporate flight department uses an iPad as well for their electronic flight bag and their electronic charts. So kind of coming full circle, we can learn a little bit from how corporate aviation, how professional and airline aviation uses the iPad, and apply that to our general aviation practices as well. Now, when it comes down to the rules, there's no FAR specifically that governs the iPad use or electronic flight bag use. Under Part 91, we essentially self-certify the product as acceptable to our flight operations. And what we use as a guidance for that is Advisory Circular 91-78. Applies to Part 91 operations, not for hire. I'll also point out here on the bottom half of this slide, there's also Advisory Circular 120-76D. And that's what applies to the commercial operators. So Part 121, which is the scheduled air carriers, and Part 135, which is the on-demand charter flights. Now in our world, again, we look at AC 91-78. This one's a little bit older. I think it was actually written before the iPad even came out, and hasn't been revised since, but it doesn't really need to, because it basically spells out all the common sense information. And I'm not sure if you've looked at any ACs recently, but they can get pretty wordy, pretty convoluted. 91-78's only 7 or 8 pages, and it's worth a read, actually. Even if you've read it maybe 4 or 5 years ago when you first started with the iPad, I'd recommend getting on to the FAA website and checking it out. It's pretty straightforward, easy to follow, and you'll find some good tips in there. So here are the highlights from my perspective that I think pilots should be most aware of, is that they consider the iPad or any tablet, an Android tablet, your iPhone, a Garmin Era GPS with database and charts on it. They consider all those a Class 1 electronic flight bag. which basically means that it's a portable device, not certified. To use the product, you must have the functional equivalent of the paper reference material on the electronic flight bag. That could be you downloading PDFs from the FAA website. However you want to go about doing that. 99% of people probably like the convenience of paying for a subscription service, again, like ForeFlight, Garmin, WingX, Stratus Insight. But basically that makes sense, right? Have your frequencies on there, have your sectionals, have your approach plates. Third point is probably the most important to think about, I guess, and that says that the backup source or a backup source is recommended, but not required. So right now we're just worried about being legal in the eyes of the FAA. Again, to restate, for Part 91, we don't have to have FAA approval. We don't have to talk to the FSDO. Completely legal to go on the airplane, take your iPad, current version of ForeFlight, all your charts downloaded, get in the airplane and go fly. Completely legal. Now, they say a backup source is recommended, and I say from a common sense standpoint, that's a very smart thing to do. Now, what your backup source is depends. Many pilots still prefer to print out some paper approach charts just for kind of belts and suspenders method of a backup. Consider a second iPad if the budget allows. What I do a lot of times too is use my iPhone as my backup, since most of these apps, again, Garmin and ForeFlight, will allow you to install it both on an iPad and an iPhone. It makes it very easy to install a parallel database of your aviation charts on your iPhone. So in that unlikely case that the iPad overheats or you have a power issue, you do have all your information on your iPhone. Both smart and common sense as far as that goes. And again, at the bottom, we'll state again that there is no FAA approval required to use the iPad to replace paper charts in the cockpit. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. This is the AC 120-76 that applies to the commercial operators. I really want to point out a couple bullet points, though, just to eliminate some confusion, because there's a lot of myths out there that there are things required for general aviation that really aren't. On that commercial side, they have to do rapid decompression testing. They have to have procedures documented for their electronic flight bag for every phase of flight, establish battery life, and also run a complete training program on the use of the EFBs that I believe is done annually. So a lot of things there that they have to follow to stay legal. So get past kind of the technical speak and the legal speak, but let's talk about what's practical again, because I think there are some things we can learn from corporate aviation and business aviation that apply to us, and we can kind of implement into our own standard operating procedures, if you want to call it that. That's the industry term, and especially the airline term for standardizing procedures across all pilots and airplanes. So 4 main categories I want to think of, or want you to think of when developing a standard operating procedure for integrating the iPad into the cockpit. Number 1, make sure you pre-flight the iPad before every single flight. Doesn't take a couple minutes, but again, make that a standard practice. Consider a backup for data. Consider a backup for power. And then how are you going to mount the iPad? It's obviously a free-floating device, a tablet, so it needs to be secured in the airplane. And these are all the things you want to think about as you build in your plan. So let's start with the pre-flight. Just like you pre-flight your airplane, it's an integral part of the cockpit. Integral part of the flight is the airplane itself. Well, now we're saying the iPad's an integral part of the flight operation as well. So treat it with the same flow and preparation that you would for the airplane. Here's my quick 6 items that I do. And again, I've been doing this for 10 years now, so it's a quick mental check. And most of these things I do the night before, just to make sure that it's 100% ready. That's going to make sure that you can also charge it and have all your databases and charts downloaded. So of course, make sure that your primary app is up to date. So it's ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot, WingX, whatever it might be. Not only so that you have the latest features, also to make sure that you have the most stable and most current version. App developers are always releasing new bug fixes and security updates, that kind of thing. So you want to have the most reliable, most recent version. Of course, make sure your charts are downloaded, whether you're a VFR IFR, that depends and may change based on any given day and based on the flight. Make sure that your battery is 100% fully charged. That's kind of a thing in the business side, that we don't dispatch a flight unless the iPad is at 100% capacity. And there's really no reason it shouldn't be with all the charging devices we have today in our cars, in our homes, and even portably with our backup batteries that many of us carry along. Set the wireless radios. That's going to be your Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi, and cell data if you have it. So making sure those are either on or off as needed. And set the screen brightness. You'd be surprised that a lot of times we just turn the screen brightness all the way up to 100%. A lot of times that's overkill in a lot of airplanes, especially airplanes with high wings, tighter cockpits that don't have a lot of sunlight shining in. If you lower that screen brightness down 10, 20%, you might add an easy extra hour of battery life to your iPad on the flight. So check the screen brightness, and if you don't need it 100%, maybe it's time to bring it back a little bit and extend the battery life. And that last one there are the backups. Again, the power and the data backups. Make sure you have that available. So let's break that down a little further into your charts and aviation data. And for this example, I'm going to show ForeFlight here. There's a couple tools now that really make sure that you'd have to go out of your way almost to not have current data and charts for your flight. So on the right-hand side, there's a feature called automatic downloads in ForeFlight. And what that will do is it will automatically download the latest set of data as it becomes available for your selected states and regions. So even if you open the iPad after that 28-day cycle becomes available, it'll go ahead and start downloading your current charts. Now, the last step I take after I'm getting ready to go, have my flight planned, is to use the pack feature, which is on the left-hand side over here. So in the route editor of ForeFlight, on the right side, it's kind of dark here, but you'll see a little suitcase with a red dot on it. Tap that before every single flight, and it's going to go ahead and load and verify for your routing that you have all the essential charts downloaded for your flight. This is dependent on what charts you have selected in the download section. So if you're an IFR pilot, you probably have the IFR and route charts, the approach charts. VFR pilots will make sure you have your sectionals. And what it also does is make sure you have all the current weather, fuel prices, and NOTAMs downloaded, so that when you're in the air and you don't have an internet connection, maybe you have to divert, or maybe you have to maybe check a TFR again and you don't have ADS-B on board with a current weather feed. You can check those fuel prices, you can check those TFRs, because it's all going to be saved right to your internal memory of your iPad. So backup data plan, we covered this already just a little bit ago when I was talking about it. So consider again a second iPad, possibly your iPhone, maybe your Android phone. If you're a Garmin Pilot user, there's a lot of Android aviation apps out there, or a paper backup. Really, again, it depends on your flight type and what you feel most comfortable with. Now, when we talk battery life on the iPad and you watch an Apple commercial or a promo online, they're going to show somebody watching a movie or reading the internet or reading books and say you're going to get 10 hours of use out of the iPad. And that's true. You'll probably get 11, actually, if you have the screen brightness turned down. The second you bring it in the airplane, though, and hook it up to a GPS source, whether it's the internal GPS in the iPad itself or a Stratus or a Bad Elf GPS, the best you're going to get is probably 6 hours, likely more towards the 4-hour point, especially as the iPad ages and the battery has some cycles on it. So kind of keep that in the back of your head. I use 4 is really the limit. Now, most of us, in terms of our pilot capacity and the airplane fuel capacity, we're not flying over 4 hours typically and on GA flights. But you want to consider, though, you may need, again, divert. You may have a longer day out of your flying than you expected. The screen might be brighter, the battery might be hotter. There's all kinds of variables that might decrease that battery life. And so because of that, you want to think of some contingency plans on what's going to be available to you from a power standpoint. So let's start in the middle, which is the dual USB charger. This is a very, very low cost and easiest insurance policy you can buy for power for your iPad if you have a cigarette lighter in your airplane. I think these are under $20. Kind of neat too, because they'll display a real-time readout of the aircraft voltage in your aircraft, as well as the amperage draw of the iPad itself. And if your voltage, let's say you're on a 28 volt system, Cessna system, and the voltage drops below 24.5, say an alternator failure or some kind of charging system malfunction, it's actually going to give you an alert and a red light. So you actually, in addition to having charging for your iPad, you've got a electrical system monitoring there, and that simple $20 USB charger. Next option on the far left is the backup battery. Lots of options here, and I'll show you some examples that we've actually designed here at Sporty's after becoming frustrated over the years with buying off-the-shelf batteries for use in the cockpit. These are less than $80 and can charge your iPad multiple times, and they actually have the bigger ones have 3 to 4 ports on them, so you can charge your iPhone, your iPad, and a ADS-B receiver, for example, all at the same time. And for aircraft owners, the best and ultimate is the panel mount USB charger, of which there are many options now available that tie right into your aircraft electrical system and guarantee that you're going to have USB power available at all times, just like you would see pretty much in any new car at this point. So I mentioned the battery backup. Again, we've been sourcing these for over 10 years now, and there's a lot of consumer grade models out there that come from overseas that really didn't meet the needs that we were looking for in aviation in terms of form factor and usability. So we designed our own, essentially. We have a 10,000 and a 20,000 milliamp hour capacity version. And to put that in perspective, that's the size of the battery. I think the iPad's full size is maybe around 7,000 or 8,000 milliamp hour. So these are larger and sometimes twice as large as the iPad battery itself. They offer USB-A and USB-C charging ports, so you can charge your more modern devices in addition to any other product that requires a standard USB-A port. That slim design, as I mentioned, fits really well in your flight bag, your backpack, whatever you're bringing along with you. But what we really liked most and what was important to us was to be able to charge this product using your existing Lightning or USB cable. So you don't have to take a separate special proprietary charging cable with you. You likely already have the cable in your flight bag to charge this battery. So great insurance for a low price for the cockpit. For pilots who are looking to get a lot of longevity out of their iPads, say going on 3 to 4 years, you're probably noticing that your battery isn't lasting as long as it used to. You're not getting that 4 to 5 hours on a given flight. There are some diagnostic features built into the iOS operating system that you can look at. And if you go to settings and then battery in the iPad settings app, you're going to see a battery analysis tool. What it's going to show you is which apps are using and consuming the most power at a given time, and then also over a given period, whether it's 24 hours or 7 days. And what it can do is help you isolate apps that are power hungry, possibly running in the background that you didn't even know were taking power when you're not using them. So a great tool to go through and just kind of do some house cleaning every once in a while and make sure that you know what your app settings are and what's going on there. And not just, again, for older iPads, newer iPads as well, again, or your iPhone, even for that matter. A lot of apps can have settings turned on that you don't know about. That's a great way to find if they're running in the background. Now, I'll probably say for most of us, we're careful about charging, we're careful about data. The one thing that's going to sneak up on you, especially in low-wing aircraft, is the iPad overheating. Because what will happen is you'll be sitting, say, at 10,000 feet, 50 degrees, 60 degrees outside, maybe even on a warm summer day, but plenty cool around. And your iPad is in the sun with the sun beating on it through the side window. Feels cool inside. The iPad feels cool on your lap, on your knee board, but that black screen is just absorbing all that heat and it's just sucking it right into the iPad and warming up the internal metal components, the battery, etc. As soon as the iPad reaches a temperature limit, it'll automatically shut down to protect the internal components, at which point you cannot use it until it cools down. You have to take it out of the sun. Probably takes 5 to 10 minutes for it to cool back down again. And you'll be really frustrated, especially if you're at a key point in the flight where you need that data and aviation information. So what is available is it's called the X-Knot cooling case. It's actually a well thought out, well-designed case that has fans incorporated into it, runs off of USB power or AA batteries, and provides a constant cooling airflow over the iPad. We see a lot of pilots in Florida, Texas, warmer states that need to fly year-round use this product and have a lot of success with it. So great option there. If you're not flying in those areas, don't think you're not susceptible to the overheating process, but you may be able to find other ways to get around that by mounting the iPad out of the sun, keeping an eye on it, that kind of thing. So just something to be aware of for those that are experiencing that issue. Even less likely, but just something to keep in the back of your mind, is that these are products with lithium-ion batteries, lithium, I believe, polymer batteries, which in a very rare situation can catch fire. You'll hear about this every once in a while happening on an airline flight or outside of aviation, just on the ground, where the battery gets into some kind of charging thermal cycle and will catch fire, and it's not fun to play with, especially in an airplane, as you could imagine. Now, on the larger flights, and we carry this in our corporate flight department, there are what's called a fire containment bag available. So instead of having to try to put out the fire with chemicals, water, etc., if the iPad were to overheat or any product in the airplane, you would have this thermal bag you could put the iPad into using gloves and often tongs or tool to isolate and suffocate the fire inside the bag there. So if you're really looking for a backup or a plan to accommodate that if it were to happen, again, consider that fire containment bag. And the price on these has come down considerably, especially for GA airplanes. Something to check out. And again, everything I'm mentioning here, I'll bring up, and product-wise and accessory is available at sporties.com. Again, I think we've done a nice job over the years of testing products, and a lot of these products are 3rd, 4th, 5th generation at this stage in the game. So you can rest assured that you're finding the best products that we've tested, and these are the products that we fly with regularly. So kind of we've done the work ahead of time to test out what's best for the cockpit, and if we don't find it, we'll typically try to make it ourselves if it's not already available. And a great example of that is the mounting methods for the iPad, which come down to really 2 options. the knee board on the left-hand side, and an airplane mount. Both of these are temporary. We're not talking about any permanent fixtures here, so again, no approvals needed. And a lot of this comes down to your preference. It's kind of a Coke versus Pepsi argument when it comes to mounting in the airplane. Depends on the iPad size model you're purchasing, what kind of airplane you're flying, etc. Knee boards work really well for renters, those flying multiple airplanes, because you can kind of personalize it, keep your gear organized, but not obviously have to find a place to mount it in the airplane every time. There are good mounting options for renters, which I'll talk about here in a minute, but I seem to find the knee board is a great option. And those range from no frills, a very simple board with some straps, all the way up to more complex and feature-rich models where they have pockets and pen holders like you see there on the left-hand side. When you're looking at these products, I put the kind of the brands across the bottom that we really like the best. And price points on these range from $20 up to $200. So again, just like the iPad itself, there's a wide range of pricing and options you can choose from when picking your mounting option. But for the knee boards themselves, there's the Sporty's flight gear line. Again, these are the products that we've designed over the years and we use in our flight operations. Many of these being 5th generation products now, so a lot of life cycles and a lot of refinements over the years to accommodate customer feedback, pilot feedback, and our own design ideas as well. On the mounting side, we really like the RAM mount system, very flexible in terms of a ball joint and cradle that allows you to use yoke mounts, suction cup mounts, and then those from MyGoFlight. MyGoFlight's a more premium brand, but a very nice system that allows you to mount in a variety of ways. So I'd highly recommend, if you're new to mounting, probably the best place to start would be iPad Pilot News. We do a detailed mounting article that goes through different types of airplanes, helps you choose the best mount for your needs, and then you can find the products branching off from the iPad Pilot News website. One I'll point out, this came out last year. It's the robust mounting system, even more affordable, starting at $29. This is nice because you're not actually buying the cradle or the mount for a particular iPad model. It's universal, so you can buy just one product, whether it's the suction cup mount or the yoke mount, and it's going to fit whether your iPhone, your iPad, or your iPad mini. But a good cost-effective option, very secure, and a nice option for the airplane. So a lot of pilots too we hear from say, I want to mount the iPad, but I don't want a big knee board, I don't want a big case, I don't want a cradle. And for that, we recommend the MyClip Multi. We call it a universal fit knee board, and it's really not a knee board. It's really very simply but elegantly designed. It's a couple clips and a strap that will fix to the side of the iPad and then wraps around your leg. So if you're looking for just the most simple option, especially in tighter cockpits where you don't want flaps folding over, you don't want all this extra features and things getting in the way, highly recommend you check out the MyClip Multi knee board. Now the next element, and if you think about it, our flight bags have changed dramatically over the last, we'll say 10 to 15 years. Back when I started, we had the big duffel bags full of books and charts, and it's kind of a point of pride of how much stuff you can put in your flight bag. But then, of course, your shoulders started hurting if you walked from the car every day, and that got old after a while. Well, like the iPad has changed the cockpit, flight bags have changed to accommodate the gear that we bring now, which is a lot less than we used to. We don't have stacks of approach charts. We don't have bundles of sectionals. We have our iPad, we have our headset, probably a backup radio, a couple other accessories. So it kind of makes you want to think about how you design and carry and organize your gear as you come to the airplane and keep it accessible. And one thing I think is important, because of the fact the iPad does have accessories. We've got charging cables, we've got plugs, we've got our ADS-B receivers, our headsets. Have a standard operating procedure for your flight bag so that if you need something in the airplane, you're not reaching into this big chasm of a bag trying to find that one special item. These bags allow you to store each individual item in a certain place, which makes it much easier and more efficient to find that product in the airplane as well. So some great options there from both, again, our Sporty's flight gear line that we've designed over the years for our own needs. And then another one I really like too is Flight Outfitters, another company that popped up in the last, I think, 5-6 years. More of a lifestyle type brand, but some really nice polished products to accommodate the iPad and all the aviation accessories. Okay, we're going to transition from some accessory and hardware and procedures into some pre-flight planning, kind of a progression as we go from buying the iPad, securing the iPad, knowing what's legal. Now we're in the pre-flight phase of using the product. So it's kind of become the all-in-one pre-flight tool, whether it's your iPad or your iPhone, to prepare for your flight. But what can happen is you have all these resources, and there's really so much there that it might overwhelm you at first. And what I see a lot of pilots doing when using the iPad for their flight preparation is just hitting the essentials they learned about during their flight training as a student pilot, which is the METAR at the destination and departure airport. Check the radar. Okay, there's no thunderstorms. Let's file our flight plan. Again, whether it's VFR, IFR. And I think that's one of the things you want to try to avoid, and it's kind of the law of primacy as you train with the iPad and learn to fly. Um, Expose yourself to a lot more, all the different weather products that are out there, the different automated tools, and that's what I want to cover here today, and maybe introduce a couple of new ones to you that you may not have looked at before. So one of those is actually kind of a blast from the past, which back in the paper days, we all bought the airport facility directory, that green book, which is now known as the chart supplement. And that contained all the information we needed for the airport before we had all these fancy electronic tools. But what's interesting is that the AFD is still printed. Some people still buy the actual books. But the AFD information is actually in every aviation app. That contains information you're probably not going to find anywhere else. A lot of information related to runway details, slope, preferred calm wind runway is a good one. Nearby obstructions. The remarks section is great. You might find some helpful hints on the taxiway layout or nearby obstructions. So anytime you head to a new airport, make that your first kind of go-to spot after you check out the basics is that AFD tag there, which is easy to overlook. It's not exactly front and center, but again, make that kind of part of your process. And if you trained in the days before the iPad, again, you probably knew the book, you may have forgotten about it, try to bring that back into your flight planning procedure. Another area too is that we've gotten away from the flight service station phone calls for weather briefings. I mean, a lot of us probably used the online website from flight service for a while, but now with everything being on the iPad, we've kind of developed our own self-weather briefing, and that's perfectly fine. There's no legal requirement that you have to call flight service. You don't have to talk to flight service. You can do a briefing for VFR, IFR flight all on your own, whatever resources you would like. But I would recommend every once in a while, especially for ForeFlight users, they have a full featured flight service briefing option in the flight section of the app. And I think what you might find is if you've kind of gotten into a routine, just to go through that, because it's going to present all the different weather choice and charting options, hazards, TFRs, etc. Much more graphical now than it was 10, 15 years ago. It's not that big 20 or 30 pages of text. But again, it might highlight a weather product that you've forgotten about over the years and bring it to your attention before a flight. A good example of that is the FAA's transition, I should say the National Weather Service's transition. They've gotten away from the text-based area forecast. They discontinued that probably 3 or 4 years ago. What they offer now is what's called the Graphical Forecast for Aviation, or GFA. You can access this on aviationweather.gov. It's a great tool. It's all computer model driven, but it allows you to see forecasts for things like cloud tops and bases over a widespread area using a map. And if you went into the weather briefing tool, for example, in ForeFlight, you'd find that they now integrate this aviation clouds forecast, which I found very, very useful when flying between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. I like to know where the bases are forecast. I like to know where the tops are forecast. It's another tool to help with your altitude selection. Also very useful in the wintertime when trying to avoid icing conditions to stay out of the clouds and moisture and precipitation. So again, that's one of those resources you might find is now part of the full weather briefing. But if you haven't done that in a while, it might be off your radar, so to speak. Another little tidbit that I love, this is probably one of my favorite tools out there in terms of aviation forecast resources that are kind of off the grid that a lot of pilots may not know about. So what this is the National Weather Service, the briefer, not the briefer, but the forecaster, as they develop the TAF for each individual airport that a TAF is produced for. This is their notes. This is what they're thinking as they generate that TAF. And to backtrack a little bit, here we are in ForeFlight in the airport section, and you'll see where my mouse is just to the right of the pop-up window. It says forecast discussion. Just below the coded TAF view, you'll tap that button and it'll bring up this little window. And if you're not a ForeFlight user, these are available in other aviation applications as well as the aviation weather website. But it's going to give you a little more information about what's going on with the weather. Because as you know, a TAF is limited to a certain amount of characters and coding, and probably doesn't tell the full picture, especially outside of 5 to 10 miles of the actual terminal airport, what's going on. So this will give you a look at, say, the weather forecasters say their feelings, their guidance, how they feel about a certain condition. So you might see thunderstorms listed in the TAF, but they might say that's really kind of a weak chance. Or they might say, hey, there's a cold front coming. There's a very likely good chance there's going to be thunderstorms. Or they'll talk about fog in the morning and say what their confidence level is in the fog extending beyond the TAF period. So I've made this an integral part of my briefing. Every single time I look at a TAF for both the departure and destination airport, I always read that forecast discussion. And I think once you get in that habit, you're going to find it very, very valuable to get information. It's also useful as you are planning across country to check some of these forecast discussions for airports along the en route portion of your flight. Again, it's going to give you information about kind of the synopsis and weather patterns and things that are building or dissipating in the area. A couple other tools that to look at in ForeFlight. Here's our ForeFlight map layer section on the left-hand side. These are also in Garmin Pilot as well as I believe Stratus Insight. But turbulence forecast and icing forecast layers. Again, these are computer-driven, but give you a chance to maybe optimize your flight plan and your altitude selection based on a comfort factor when you're considering turbulence. And it's forecast, so on the bottom here, you can advance the time slider into the future, and on the right-hand side, you can advance the slider up for different altitudes. So it gives you both a three-dimensional view and a forward-looking view of potential forecast turbulence along your route. And then the same thing there, there's also an option for icing in the wintertime in the seasons around winter to get a feel for what the icing conditions are looking to be. Not going to be 100% reliable, but again, it's just one more tool you can use as you're planning your flight. Here we are looking at Garmin Pilot, for example. And one thing on Garmin I'll point out, so we have our overlays here for the weather. We have icing selected. See down here at the bottom right, it says probability. That is important to look at because sometimes they also offer severity. So you want to know if you're looking at the probability of ice or how severe the ice will be if you actually encounter it, which are two completely different things. So make sure you are aware. Anytime you're looking at icing, always know that if you're looking at probability or severity. Here we are looking at ForeFlight again, and Garmin Pilot has a similar feature here, which is the weather imagery. So there's only so much you can overlay on an actual moving map. We can look at flight categories, current METAR, that kind of thing, radar. But some of the more advanced and more detailed information is going to be in the imagery section. And what you look at here really depends on your flight, VFR IFR, where you're going, and what season it is. But you're going to find some very helpful precipitation forecast tools. They go out to 7 days, so very useful for long-range planning. This is where you're going to find your surface analysis. So it really rounds out to make the app a full-featured product outside of the satellite imagery, the weather radar, PIREPs, that kind of thing that show on the moving map. This kind of goes into more of the advanced forecasting tools that I think are very helpful. Next up, again, whether you're a VFR or IFR, you want to know about airspace. Obviously more important for VFR pilots, especially if we're not planning on talking to ATC for the flight. And what I always like to do is put our destination and departure airport. As you can see here, we're doing a flight in Florida. Looks like from the East Coast over to the West Coast towards Tampa. So after you put your flight plan in, go ahead up here to the route editor under flight plan and tap the profile button here. And it's going to give you a three-dimensional view of the airspace along your flight and your altitude. Especially useful for taking a look at the military operating areas, the MOAs, restricted areas, prohibited, alert, etc. So a great way to do a quick check on your airspace. And you, of course, can tap on the airspace in the 3D view to view the altitudes, or tap on the actual chart itself to view that. Here we are looking at a similar profile view in Garmin Pilot. In this case, we're seeing the terrain obviously is an issue here at this currently selected altitude. And also has the Class B airspace depicted, as well as some weather features on the Garmin Pilot profile view. Another important item, and well, stadium TFRs, I guess right now it's not as big a deal as it was 3 to 4 months ago, but TFRs in general are very important. And TFRs are a layer that I leave on my ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot. I leave that layer turned on all the time. I always want to have TFRs in my face, just to double, triple check that I know about what's going on. And what's neat about these apps, and once Major League Sports come back with full audience and fans, is that they alert you to the stadiums that have that 30,000 person capacity for Major League Baseball, NFL, etc. Because that's a blanket TFR NOTAM. The FAA does not publish individual TFRs for every single sporting event. but the app developers now take care of that for you. So again, Garmin Pilot, ForeFlight, they're going to list out those stadium TFRs. So I find it helpful when flying in a new city. Probably not going to be as familiar with where the actual NFL stadium is or the Major League Baseball stadium. And it's usually baseball that'll sneak up on you, given the length of the season and playing every night in the summertime typically. But to make you aware of where those are and to plan around as necessary when flying VFR. ForeFlight introduced a nice new feature in the last year or so called 3D Preview. Very helpful for looking at your flight path in advance to gauge maybe terrain, landmarks, that kind of thing. Here we're looking at an instrument approach briefing into the Dayton airport. We can see the city, the relationship to the airport, to the town. Very useful tool for VFR pilots as well during pre-flight planning to get a feel for the terrain and pick out some landmarks along the way and know what they're looking for. This does require an internet connection, so you want to check this out ahead of time. But again, a nice feature in ForeFlight to check out. AOPA has made a big push, really has been making this push for a long time, but it's starting to come to fruition now in aviation apps is they publish their database and have worked with FBOs to make it more transparent about what the fees are. Anything from obviously fuel prices we've had accessible for a while now, but things like landing fees or ramp fees, tie down fees, larger aircraft need GPUs or other jet support equipment. A lot of FBOs are now publishing that data, and both Garmin Pilot and ForeFlight will show that to you in your aviation app in the FBO section. So in addition, as you go in to check your fuel prices here, and you want to get a general feel for what the prices are, you'll see that right in the app. I still recommend calling if you are concerned about the actual amount. It's probably helpful to make sure you know the details, and oftentimes you'll find that certain fees are waived, obviously based on fuel purchases or length of stay. But again, it gives you the kind of that bigger picture view of your different FBO options as you travel to a new airport. So after many years, I'd say 3 years of delays, last year, August 2019, the FAA transitioned to requiring IFR pilots and VFR pilots to use the ICAO flight plan form, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization. It brings the US in line with the rest of the world in terms of the flight planning layout. Most pilots found this really was not a big deal. Pretty seamless. Once you enter your your airplane data and your personal data into the app, following the flight plans is nearly identical. You push the same buttons mostly, and the data is transferred right from your app to the FAA's flight planning system. The one thing that takes a little bit of work if you haven't done this yet, or you're still maybe haven't followed a flight plan since this transition, most work is entering all the aircraft information. They want to know things like your transponder, ADS-B details, navigation details, etc. And if you are new to this or looking to learn more about this, this is another great resource we have on iPad Pilot News. Encourage you to check that out. You can see in detail. We give examples of Cessna aircraft, Cirrus aircraft, Beechcraft with common avionics, and show you the exact codes to put in when setting up your ICAO aircraft in your app. Okay, let's go flying now. So we've got the pre-flight part finished. Let's talk about really why we are probably using the iPad, which is the in-flight resource. And again, I like to think of it now as the digital co-pilot. So I fly in a two-person crew a lot of times, and again, in the corporate aviation, and there's typically the pilot flying and there's the pilot not flying, the person in the right seat who is assisting the pilot with a variety of things, like providing timely information before and during the flight. Going to keep a set of eyes on the flight instruments, engine instruments, any kind of warning systems to call out abnormalities, because the pilot flying is focused on that task, which is keeping the aircraft at the proper altitude, on the proper flight path, proper heading, etc. Assist with the duties during the high workload phase of flight. And of course, number one in our operation is the co-pilot makes the best coffee. So obviously the iPad can help with most of those items there. Coffee we'll leave up to you still for now. So let's start with the flight planning process, especially for IFR pilots. And this has really changed a lot as information and data has become more available, both online and in the iPad aviation applications. So let's say you're planning a flight. This is kind of an extreme example, but from the greater Cincinnati airport to Atlanta Hartsfield. And there's probably a good chance you're not going to get a direct clearance, IFR clearance, given that a lot of traffic in and out of both airports and a lot of routing requirements between the various air traffic control facilities. So in this example, you could take a shot in the dark and pick some waypoints, or you could go on past data, which is available, that or it uses clearances issued to other aircraft flying between those two airports. So you can see here both apps present that information fairly similarly in terms of you're going to see the routing issued between both airports, and obviously between two big Class B airports, you're going to have arrivals and departure procedures, probably an airway and some intersections. On the simpler terms, for GA flight, it might help you identify where a direct flight is often cleared, so you can go ahead and file that. And you're also going to find typically maybe a VOR or two or intersection, typically an intersection leaving a busy Class B airport that is typically cleared for the aircraft. So what this allows you to do then is go ahead and plan that routing on your own flight. Go ahead and file that. There's probably a 99% chance you're going to hear cleared as filed from clearance delivery as you go to start up and taxi out. And that saves so much time and hassle because you already know your route. You've already got it entered into your iPad. You have it entered into your GPS in your panel. You're not sitting there with the engine running trying to figure out where some obscure intersection is, where some obscure VOR is. You're already ahead of the game. So for IFR pilots especially, I rarely recommend you use that ATC cleared routing function. And they're going to break the flights down too based on altitude, and it's going to give you information on fuel burn and distance. So if you're flying a Cirrus, you don't have to worry about the clearances issued to the jet flying in flight level 300, for example. NOTAMs have always been a hot topic, and not for good reasons, because they're the item that's going to get you most in trouble. But oftentimes it's the data presented that's hard to find. And aviation apps have changed that, and ForeFlight especially. And what they do is they're going to publish the NOTAMs applicable to an airport, especially the airport surface areas, runways, taxiway diagrams, right on the taxiway diagram. So as you can see here, we're looking at ForeFlight. We have the airport diagram loaded for this airport. Looks like we're in San Antonio. You're going to find that red box at the top of the screen and tap that, and you're going to view all the NOTAMs, both past, present, and future, to make sure that information is right there available to you. You're also going to find this airport NOTAMs box on the approach plates as well. So that's where you're going to find things like minimums changes, procedural changes, distance changes, whatever it might be, right on the approach chart where it matters. So it makes it really a good chance you're not going to overlook that information. Next most important thing is, or actually this is probably more important, is either airport or runway closures. We've all probably been there once where you show up on a casual VFR day for a flight, do some sightseeing, and you head to an airport and see the airport's closed when you get there because it was missed in your pre-flight briefing due to either personal oversight or just the data being buried in a page 8 of the weather briefing. So what ForeFlight does now is they're going to put a big red banner just about anywhere that you can think of when looking at airport information to alert you about runway closures or airport closures. So if you're doing a normal briefing, I shouldn't even say normal briefing, if you're doing a very lazy briefing and do nothing more than check the METAR for your destination airport, you're probably going to see that big red banner that says runway closed, and a good chance you're not going to overlook it for that flight. Back to the IFR pilot again. IFR flights, most of the time we need to have a legal filed alternate airport, and that task can often be kind of challenging as we go look through different resources and see what the alternate minimums are based on the approach charts and the terminal procedures publications, etc. Check the weather at each airport. ForeFlight does have a tool when you're in the flight section that makes this a little bit easier. It's called the Alternate Airport Advisor feature. And as you're filing your flight plan and you tap the alternate airport, it's going to bring up this little dialog box that's going to show you the forecast weather and various airport options near your destination, along with fuel burn and time to get to that point from your destination. So a nice resource there to kind of speed up and give some information as you select your alternate. Another nice feature for the higher level ForeFlight subscriptions is the automatic takeoff and landing distance calculations. They've got data for most of the main GA aircraft and even some of the higher performance aircraft now as well, that will automatically calculate your takeoff and landing distance based on your fuel planned and your passenger load entered on the flight screen. So great information to kind of get out there right away, and you can double check without even really doing much at all other than entering in some basic data to do those performances. And what I really like is that it'll give you a warning there too. So let's say that you entered in your fuel, you entered in your passengers, you're at a hot day out west. It's going to give you warnings, notes if your takeoff distance is approaching or exceeds the limits of the airport that you are departing from or planning on landing at. So again, that's that kind of digital co-pilot feature that I really like, that get your attention as you get busy and things are moving around a lot of variables. If you have an oversight on one element, it will likely get your attention to let you know that you're possibly operating out of parameters. ForeFlight also includes some nice templates for your clearances or PIREP alerts. Again, you can use your fingertip, you can use a stylus or the Apple Pencil. As you get towards the Apple Pencil, your writing gets a lot more precise, as we'll say, but nice features there for taking notes in flight. Yeah, I'll mention too, it's 3 o'clock. Again, I probably have another 20 minutes here or so, so feel free to stick around. We'll keep on trucking, and I appreciate everybody sticking around today here on a Thursday. If you do have to go, again, check back to Sporty's YouTube channel. We'll have this recording up tomorrow to watch as many times as you like, and we'll have it organized as well with chapter markers, so you can jump right to any given point at that time. So this is one of my favorite features, not because I use it, because it kind of shows where we're heading in aviation, which is the pre-departure clearance function. And part of the next generation air traffic control system, we hear that term used and have used the last 10 years or so, mainly related to ADS-B transponders and surveillance and weather on the aircraft. But another big part of next gen is the ability for wireless data link communications between aircraft. Right now, typically it's done with the Boeing and the Airbuses, the higher performance business jets, where they can relay clearances and even some basic tower departure clearances from the tower to the aircraft using modern, sophisticated data link avionics in the aircraft. But there are some of these features available to pilots now, especially when you're flying at some of the larger airports in the US, and that's called the pre-departure clearance system, or PDC for short. And ForeFlight and Garmin both support this. And what it allows you to do is receive your IFR clearance via text message or email, or also sent right to your app. And it allows you to eliminate that call to clearance delivery at that airport to get the clearance. The only caveat here is once you sign up for the system at one of these airports, you have to use that every single time. Not a big deal. You're probably going to want to. You're not going to want to call clearance delivery. But just want to be aware that that is a premium feature available if you are flying at some of the larger Class B or C airports, again, to skip that call to clearance delivery. I'm hoping over time, and it's only inevitable, that this will be spread out to more airports, some of the Class D airports, and eventually even center and approach control communications will move to a data link type system away from the old radio system. But again, kind of shows us a look into the future of where the FAA is heading with communications. Back to ForeFlight, and we're kind of bouncing around here, but just lots of little helpful tips that you might want to check out. ForeFlight started publishing text versions of the ATIS for the larger airports. And so when you're in the weather section there, you'll see ATIS. And so you'll see basically a transcription of what's actually being broadcast on the ATIS frequency for that airport. So if you are flying to a larger Class B or C airport, it's kind of nice to check this out in advance. You can see what runways they're using, what approaches they're using, any other kind of special alerts. So you're not getting that information for the very first time on ATIS in the air over the frequency. One more step to help you be prepared before flight. Next one is called Glide Advisor. Garmin Pilot has something similar, as in this case we're looking at ForeFlight. But what this will do is allow you to evaluate and that kind of oh crap moment but if the engine were to quit or you had some kind of power reduction or had to get on the ground quickly, it's going to show you where you can glide to based on your current altitude, and if you have an ADS-B receiver based on the current winds out there. The one thing you want to make sure you do, though, and this is what I highly recommend for the ForeFlight users today, if you haven't done it yet, is go to your settings in your app and come down here to map overlays and then glide settings. And you can enter in your best glide speed and your glide ratio. Here we have 65 knots and a 9:1 glide ratio for one of our flight school 172s. And so in the worst case scenario, if you had to get on the ground quickly because of a situation, or you actually take that another way, you want to stay in the air as long as possible and glide to possibly a emergency use airport, emergency use field, whatever it might be, you'd have that glide turquoise kind of multi-shaped figure around your aircraft that could show you where you could glide to. So one of the things you want to do now and not when you actually need it in the airplane when time is tight. Another kind of digital co-pilot item is the checklist feature in ForeFlight. Many are aware, obviously, that ForeFlight does have a checklist, but you may not know it also has a audio feature. So it'll actually speak the checklist items to you, which can be very useful in the airplane, especially when you connect your iPad to your headset via Bluetooth or a wired connection. So it kind of brings more of a high-tech checklist item to your cockpit. Also, if nothing else, if you don't use the checklist for your routine items, I'd still say go ahead and load the checklist in there for your aircraft. And ForeFlight has a database of many of the common aircraft types. But let's say you have an emergency, and obviously these things sneak up on you, and the emergency checklist is out of reach, or it's behind the seat, you can't get to it in time. ForeFlight has that dedicated emergency checklist button there on the top right, that red button. So you can pop over to your checklist tab here, tap that button, and quickly access your emergency checklist. When it comes time for takeoff or landing, especially at airports with only one runway, well, actually multiple runways, we can take some of the guesswork out of the optimum situation, especially at non-towered airports. ForeFlight will do an analysis of the crosswind and headwind components for you. And here we're looking at the runway tab for ForeFlight, and we can see where the headwind and tailwind components lie. And if crosswind's a consideration, which airport's going to have the least amount of crosswind component. When you're in the air and you have an ADS-B receiver, Sentry or Stratus, this data is also fed via your ADS-B receiver. So it's a good en route check as you're coming into your airport to check your runways as well to get that information. One of my other favorite features, and ForeFlight's done a really nice job and probably the best of any app out there, is the alerting features. Again, these are the kind of background checks that the app is always running across the variety of parameters to make sure everything is looking good with your flight, both a three-dimensional aspect, in the air and then on the ground as well when taxiing. And one thing you want to do if you haven't done this in a while is to go check out your settings in ForeFlight and check out all these alerts here. So we're going to cover a couple of them right now, but if you haven't looked at it in a while, go ahead and see what all the options are and see what's out there. And hopefully they're already turned on, but if not, make sure they are and make sure it's configured how you'd like based on your flight operation. And as I mentioned before, related to the checklist, I'd highly recommend if you have a Bluetooth headset, like the Bose or Lightspeed or David Clark, go ahead and connect your iPad to your headset. And all these alerts that pop up, or if they pop up, will come through as an audio alert to your headset as well. So I'm sure if you're like me, you're not staring at your iPad the entire flight. It might even be in a standby mode of some sort. So this is a way to get those audio messages relayed to you if the iPad screen isn't right in front and center. So a couple things. Our first group here we'll call helpful callouts. Things just to get your attention and keep you aware of what's going on. The nearest altimeter setting on the left-hand side, if you're flying in the flight levels, as you descend through 18 or flight level 180, ForeFlight will give you the nearest altimeter setting fed in through the ADS-B receiver when connected. As you become in range of your destination airport, it's going to feed in the AWOS, ASOS, or ATIS frequency. A good kind of reminder there to get your attention to tune into the local weather. You'll get another alert when on a 3-mile final to your final approach runway. A good kind of double check that you're lined up with the right runway and correct airport. Now the next ones I consider time sensitive warnings. So again, for those flying with ADS-B receiver with traffic, it's going to alert you to nearby traffic within 500 to 1,000 feet or so of your current position. It'll give you a call out both audibly and visually, as you see there. If you inadvertently fly towards a TFR that you are not supposed to be in this case, we're heading towards the Washington, D.C. area, so that was okay. But if there was a stadium TFR or a presidential TFR, it's going to get your attention. And then, of course, the obstacle and terrain hazards. It'll display the special pop-up window, yellow indicating that terrain is within 100 to 1,000 feet of your current position, and red indicating within 100 feet of your current altitude or above you. So a great way to get your attention and possibly turn quickly if a collision is imminent. On the ground, a helpful call out, as I'm sure many have heard and seen as you enter the runway, is the actual runway number and feet remaining. Very helpful. This could have prevented several accidents over the years prior to this technology, but good way to verify you're on the correct runway and that your performance matches up with the available runway out in front of you. After landing, busy time as you decelerate, configure the aircraft, and determine where you're going to head for parking. As you decelerate below 40 knots, and if you have the, actually it doesn't really matter which subscription plan you have, ForeFlight will automatically show the taxiway diagram. And if you have one of the Performance Plus plans, one of the higher level plans at ForeFlight, you'll see your aircraft's position on the runway as well. So you'll find this very helpful as you decelerate, taxi off on the first available taxiway. You'll look down on your iPad and see the taxiway charts already ready for you. it saves some of that heads down time of having to swipe through pages and look for more data during a busy time of flight, especially a critical time of flight at a congested airport where a lot of aircraft movements are going on. Relatively new feature added to ForeFlight on the left-hand side is the timer. Very simple function, but it's kind of nice to have a timer built into the application itself, and ForeFlight finally added that within the last month or so. So if you tap the More button here at the bottom right, you'll see a new timer option here available that can either count up or count down. Very useful for maybe just tracking the flight time in general from takeoff. Also find it useful to set a countdown timer for fuel tank switching. Instrument pilots would like this also when flying a holding pattern. So nice tool right in there, and it'll give you an alert when the timer goes off as well. Garmin pilot users will find a similar feature under the tools section up here, and then stopwatch. That appears at the top of the Garmin pilot application. Probably not doing a whole lot of this right now, but hopefully we will be again soon, which is international flying and getting back down to the Caribbean or Mexico or Canada. There is a requirement for U.S. Customs to file a passenger manifest to list out the details for every occupant of the aircraft, both entering and leaving the U.S. And that can be a rather time-consuming process if you use the U.S. Customs website. I've done it many times, and it's not the most user-friendly experience. Now, of course, there's an app for that, and the one we really like is called FlashPass, which is a private developer that actually works with Customs, and they'll submit your EAPIS passenger manifest right to Customs from your iPad. What's nice about this, it's only a few dollars to send a manifest, or you could have a plan if you do a lot of border crossings. But it saves all your passengers, all your passport numbers, that kind of thing. Makes it easy to create manifests, submit them, etc. Over time. So if you are flying internationally, I'd highly recommend you check out that FlashPass application. Okay, we're going to wrap up soon, but I do want to cover a little bit on data link weather as we come to an end here. Again, this is a feature that I think led a lot of pilots to buy an iPad, and especially buy an ADS-B receiver, as we'll talk about here, because it now allows us to keep an eye on the weather in flight. We can look at radar, we can look at destination METARs, look at PIREPs en route, and get a feel for things and make big picture decisions en route that we couldn't do before. Of course, we could have called Flight Watch, we could call Flight Service, but that doesn't really provide that same kind of level of contextual information that looking at your iPad screen does with current weather. And really the FAA in general, as part of their kind of advanced services, is slowly phasing out that human-to-human contact with flight service. You can still call them for a weather briefing, you can still contact them over radio frequencies in flight, but they'd much prefer you to use these more modern tools in the airplane. So a quick point of clarity here, we talk about ADS-B, which is Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast System. It has really two components the pilot should be aware of. There on the left-hand side is the ADS-B out transponder. That's the component that's required as of January 1st, 2020, this year, when flying in Class B airspace, Class C airspace, above 10,000 feet. Basically anywhere that required a Mode C transponder previously now requires an ADS-B out transponder. That's a $2,000 to $3,000 product, typically requires it to be installed by an avionics shop or a mechanic or technician, requires some paperwork. Okay, so that's the left-hand side. The right-hand side is the part that we all like and we actually get some good benefit from, which is ADS-B weather and traffic. And this part is all optional, but it's very, very good product to have in the airplane. There's no paperwork, there's no certification, it's all portable, so it's kind of one of those things you buy like the iPad and mount it in the airplane yourself and go flying. And these products range from $300 up towards $1,000, so very affordable product, and they're going to deliver, again, these weather products subscription free. So you're not paying those monthly fees like we did prior to ADS-B to get that data link weather. So it's kind of a unique system in the fact it's ground-based. It's not a satellite-based system. So there's hundreds and hundreds of towers across the US that broadcast this weather data up to the airplane. And a lot of airports have these on the ground, actually. A lot of Class B and C airports have these towers. So you may even see this ADS-B weather as you're taxiing out. But typically across the US, you're above 500 feet or so, you're going to start getting reception. Anywhere above that, you're going to get great reception to get a nice weather and traffic picture. And so what essentially happens is this portable receiver, as we showed here with Stratus, picks up that broadcast information and then relays it wirelessly to your iPad in the cockpit, typically over Wi-Fi, its own Wi-Fi network. So what are you going to get? You're going to get weather radar updated every 5 to 10 minutes or so. So not real time, but more than up to date enough to make, again, big picture decisions about your flight and to track, say, convective weather development, that kind of thing. METARs, TAFs, pilot reports, AirMets, SIGMETs, basically the whole kind of standard weather listing of products that you'd expect from the FAA and National Weather Service. Also is going to update TFRs, which is a very nice feature to have a constant feed of TFR data in the airplane. They're also going to pick up other aircraft that have ADS-B out transponders, which is a lot of airplanes now since the mandate is out. So you're going to see other aircraft around you as well. So a great way for traffic and collision avoidance to use the product in the airplane. Again, these are portable, so they're battery operated. Battery life usually 8 to 9 hours on the average model. They have an integrated GPS, so it's going to supply that GPS data to your iPad and show your position on the moving map. Most of them are Wi-Fi, some are Bluetooth, but either way, it's going to be a wireless connection to your iPad, which also means you can connect to multiple devices. So in our corporate example, we have 2 to 3 iPads in the airplane. They can all connect to one device, one Stratus or Sentry, which is really nice. And many also have an optional AHARS feature, standing for Attitude Heading Reference System. And that's going to allow the product to display an attitude indicator for pitch and bank information, another good backup tool for the cockpit. The 3 that we really like are the Stratus, the Garmin GDL series, and the Sentry. I'll kind of talk a little more about those here now. Starting with the Sentry, the most affordable option is the Sentry Mini, developed by ForeFlight, works only with the ForeFlight application, includes a built-in GPS, full-featured ADS-B weather and traffic. Only limitation here, and it's part of the lower prices, there's no battery, so it does require you to plug it into a USB power source, but it starts at $299. So if looking for a budget-friendly option, this really is a good product to start there. If you can upgrade to the Sentry, I would really recommend that. That goes for $499. Includes everything I mentioned before with the Sentry Mini. Also adds a 12-hour battery. Includes a nice suction cup mount, as you can see there. That's from a flight I took a couple weeks ago. And an Aztec mounts nicely to the side window for great reception. And what's unique about this receiver is it also has a carbon monoxide detector. And you can see here on the Sentry screen, this is a ForeFlight screenshot trimmed down. It's got carbon monoxide. It's continuously monitoring the levels in the aircraft. And if it were to detect some kind of issue related to your engine or heater, it's going to give a loud siren on the actual Sentry. It's going to give you an alert in ForeFlight. It's going to get your attention, essentially. So nice little backup tool there from Sentry and the carbon monoxide feature. Probably the most well-known ADS-B receiver is the Stratus. Was the first one out there many, many years ago when ADS-B first really popped up with all the new towers. Stratus is on the 3rd generation model. Very, very nice unit. What's new in the last couple of years, it now works with more applications besides just ForeFlight, and that's the Stratus 3 model. Also works with apps like WingX Pro, Flight Plan Go, Stratus Insight, and FlyQ. So if you're operating one of those other applications, the Stratus 3 is really a nice upgrade to bring that weather and traffic data to the cockpit. Now, of course, Garmin has their full line of ADS-B receivers. Very similar feature set. What's unique about Garmin is some of their upgraded models also support SiriusXM satellite weather. So a lot of pilots may be flying in the Bahamas or further into Canada, and those that want some more advanced weather features feel that they would get a good value out of that $39.99 monthly subscription to get SiriusXM. Big difference there also is that satellite based, so there are no limitations across the US in terms of where you can receive that information, but a great tool, a great way to get SiriusXM and the music. That's a big part of it also. A lot of pilots like to get the music information, which will stream right to your iPad application from the GDL 51 or 52 from Garmin. And I'll point out also that it's not just for Garmin Pilot, that also works with ForeFlight. So why might you want to consider the upgrade to SiriusXM? As I mentioned, it works further into southern Canada. It has some more detailed storm tracking features, convective activity. It's still a weather delay, or it still has a delay built into it, so you're not going to use this to closely navigate around embedded thunderstorm cells, but it's going to give you a little more information about the tops and track of motion. Again, as I mentioned, also has better coverage down into the Bahamas, out southeast of Florida, and the XM radio music function. Now, what's nice about ADS-B in the next-gen system is the FAA has a plan to continue to grow this. And last year, for example, they released 4 new weather products available over the ADS-B weather system. And here we're looking at ForeFlight. This is a screenshot taken in the air, but you can see that there's now forecast cloud tops, forecast turbulence, center weather advisories, and observed lightning strikes. Each example there showing with its update cycle. So as you buy an ADS-B receiver, as you buy an app, it's a product that grows over time. There's new firmware updates, there's new app updates, and kind of a nice thing to see in the aviation world, since these are non-certified products that will continue to get new features out of them over time. And here's a quick screenshot showing those 4 new features in ForeFlight. And again, I don't have too much time to spend on each one of these, but head over to iPad Pilot News and search for ADS-B weather, and you can learn more about each of the new weather products there. So a couple quick tips. I've been flying with these ADS-B weather receivers really since the day they came out. I also fly with onboard weather radar in a lot of airplanes I fly, and have some kind of general takeaways. The best way to use data link weather, again, I mentioned it's not real time, so that thunderstorm cell you're looking at could be 5-10 miles away by the time you get there. So hopefully you have a visual line of sight view of the storm system out there. If you're looking at an embedded system with a lot of storms and murky stratus and cumulus clouds, your best bet is just to stay far away from the whole thing. And it might take a 50 or 100 mile diversion, but you can clearly see where you can pick a waypoint that gets you around that weather, or get you to a different altitude that allows you to visually see the weather. So again, you're not going to use this system to pick through these thunderstorm cells here, but rather to go around it on and onto your destination. The other thing I always say too is and I see this a lot actually, especially in the summertime, is these convective systems are building. You may not see weather on the Stratus ADS-B receiver or Century ADS-B receiver feed, but you're going to see some nasty clouds out in front of you. It doesn't mean just because there's not a convective weather cell displayed on your iPad, it's okay to fly through it. So nothing's changed in terms of how we evaluate weather in our flying. If it looks rough and sharp edges at the top of a cumulus cloud, stay away from it. Your eyes always win. So don't let it kind of bring you into a false sense of complacency that just because there's nothing out in front of you, that it's a clear path ahead. A couple last things I'll point out, some new things in the last 6 months or so. Many may have heard of an app called Arovi. It's a nice app that was introduced many, many years ago. Was unique about that, in addition to being a full-featured electronic flight bag application, it allowed pilots, or still does, allows pilots to issue pilot reports right from the application. So most of us don't fly with an internet connection, so it's something you could do back on the ground. But you could file the pilot report and send it back into flight service. Hopefully, as we get more internet connectivity and that becomes widespread in the years ahead, we'll be able to issue pilot reports right from the airplane. But for now, that app was a nice way to do it. Well, Apario, the company that owns and developed the Stratus line of ADS-B receivers and transponders, bought Arovi, and now it's called Stratus Insight, and made a lot of upgrades, and it's a really nice app to check out. It has a free 30-day period to try it if you haven't seen it yet. Works with the Stratus ADS-B receivers, of course. Another unique feature there, it has a speech to text feature. So it's actually, you can pipe into your aircraft intercom, and as air traffic control reads clearances or communications, it'll actually transcribe those into text on in the app and save those. So great tool for student pilots or those learning to fly, possibly learning to add an instrument rating, to record all your communications and check back later. Or if you get a clearance in flight, it's a quick way to look down and maybe see a better interpretation of it than what you heard over the radio. And Apario, with the Stratus Insight app, is one of the few apps that also has a very full-featured Apple Watch app. Surprisingly, there's not a whole lot of aviation EFB companies that support the Apple Watch also. So if you're looking for that feature, the Stratus Insight's a definite way to go. Another company here that makes health products, oximeters, carbon monoxide detection. They also make oxygen tank monitoring. They're a very high-tech company in terms of kind of a health monitoring. They also have a very full-featured iPhone and iPad app that wirelessly connect to these sensor products. So if you're looking to fly at higher altitudes, or with the pulse oximeter, or looking to again to monitor your oxygen tank levels right from your iPad or iPhone, there is a great product to check out. Of course, on the training side, Sporty's in-house here, again, we develop over 25 courses, aviation training courses, and we've seen that pilots have a lot of interest recently with aviation training from both the currency and adding new rating standpoint over the last 3 to 4 months as we've spent more time at home. I'd encourage you to check out our pilot training app. It's free to download on the App Store. Just search for pilot training. But you're going to find a lot of great courses on there, from a beginning standpoint, private pilot, learning to fly, adding an instrument rating. We have a flying with ForeFlight course, up to more advanced topics like aviation weather, a lot of programs on Garmin avionics, a new series with Patty Wagstaff on aerobatics, and many communication programs. So you're going to find a wide variety, probably anything again from beginner up to advanced level courses to check out. So as we spend more time at home and you're trying to stay current, highly recommend you check out the Sporty's pilot training app. And of course, flight simulators have become very popular in the last 3 to 4 months as well. If you have one of these, even the most basic, they integrate with your iPad, mainly Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight. And you can use either X-Plane or Redbird, Prepared, Microsoft Flight Sim to simulate the experience of flying on your iPad. So you'll see the moving map, you'll see your ground speed, all that kind of thing. So again, it kind of helps you stay current with your iPad during the times maybe you can't fly as much as you'd like to. That's all I have. I say all. That's a lot of information, but again, we want to make this kind of a fast-paced catch-all with the intent that you can come back at any given time to review later. And of course, again, I want to say check out iPad Pilot News for any topic here that you'd like some more information on. Just use our search function there, and you'll find a wealth of information on a lot more of these topics. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chris and see if we have any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Bret. Very informative, and we do have a few questions that I wanted to save until the end. First one is, when performing a weather briefing, is it logged someplace so you can prove you obtained all information regarding your flight in the event the FAA becomes involved in an issue, such as with 1-800 Weather Brief?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, ForeFlight does do that. So every single time you pull up an airport page or look at a METAR or pull up a weather overlay on your moving map, ForeFlight is logging that and connecting it to your account. Obviously, that data is rarely used because weather accidents just don't happen that often, and it's typically not due to negligence of a pre-flight briefing. But yeah, to alleviate concerns for those that really like to have flight service log that data when they were calling flight service, ForeFlight in particular, I know does keep a record of that tied to your user account. I can't speak for the other ones, but that is something that ForeFlight does.
Great. Next question. Is the pre-clearance via text available with Garmin Pilot?
Yeah, so Garmin Pilot bought flightplan.com, I want to say 3 years ago. And flightplan.com is geared towards more corporate aviation. The pilot's more likely to use the pre-departure clearance function. So because of that now, Garmin Pilot has a lot of those flightplan.com features, and yes, they do offer that pre-departure clearance in the app.
Great. Okay. Next question. As a Canadian GA pilot using ForeFlight, I usually file VFR flight plans with FSS. Does ForeFlight planning filing work in Canada also, or just in the USA with the FAA?
All right, you stumped me on that one. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of Canadian experience to give a good answer. I will say the team at foreflight.com, support email at ForeFlight, they're excellent. I would highly recommend sending them a quick email and get an answer there. But yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience with that particular aspect to get a good answer for you.
All righty. Next question. I find that I keep getting an obstacle alert when I know that there aren't any obstacles in front of me. Are there any suggestions or settings I can work on?
Yeah, what I would do first off is see the source of your altitude. So you can, I think we're talking about ForeFlight here. At the bottom of the map screen, you can add what's called the instrument panel view, and you can change those instrument panel parameters to show ground speed, to show altitude, whatever it might be. What I would do is start off, and you can even show pressure altitude versus GPS altitude. I would see what is being displayed there, because obviously ForeFlight only knows the information based on the external sensors it's getting. I would see in that scenario what the altitude is showing for the Stratus or Sentry or whatever the product is, and compare that to your actual altitude, and even grab some screenshots. So to grab a screenshot, you would push your home button and the top button at the iPad at the same time. It'll save a photo of whatever's on the screen. That's very helpful for troubleshooting. So go ahead and get that instrument panel view on there with the altitude being displayed, get that obstacle alert and take a screenshot of it. And then I'd probably send it over to ForeFlight to see if they can take a closer look at it. Because I personally haven't had that issue. So it sounds like some kind of conflict of the altitude data coming into the app.
Great. And then last question for today. Is there a downside to purchasing a Wi-Fi only iPad versus one that is Wi-Fi/cellular, specifically with the ForeFlight app?
That's a great question. And I didn't cover that early on, but I should have made a note of that. So anytime you buy any model iPad, you have the option of buying a Wi-Fi version only. For an extra $129, you can add what's called cellular data, which allows the iPad to connect to AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon. And so the first consideration is from the iPad usage, is it something you're going to use outside of aviation? Do you have value and benefit in that cellular data plan to be able to get weather briefings maybe when you're away from a Wi-Fi network, possibly traveling in a car or whatever it might be? If you have a use for that cell data to have internet all the time, then definitely it's worthwhile. Now, from an aviation side, what you get when you upgrade to the cellular model is that model also has a built-in GPS into the iPad itself. So what a lot of pilots will do is they will just buy that iPad with cellular data model and never even activate the cell data feature and just use the internal GPS. So my counter argument to that is that if you don't plan on using the cell data and are just buying it for the GPS, you probably are also flying with an ADS-B receiver or have a connected cockpit that has GPS feeding the iPad also. So you're probably going to have a GPS source already when flying with one of those products. If you're flying just VFR and don't plan on doing ADS-B weather or having any other external components, then yes, absolutely, it's a great deal just to have the self-contained GPS built into the iPad that we don't have to worry about an accessory. So it kind of really depends on your use case, if you find value in the cell data outside of aviation, and then what GPS you plan on using in the cockpit. If you don't have a use for ADS-B weather, you could also always just buy a $99 GPS accessory as well from Bad Elf that would supply that GPS data later on.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for that great presentation, Bret. I know I learned quite a bit. I want to say thank you to everyone who attended the webinar today, Flying with the iPad. We will be uploading this to our YouTube webinars page within the next 24 hours. We recommend you swing on by, check it back out, and feel free to share with all your friends. We have more webinars coming this month, so also feel free to swing by our website and sign up for future webinars. We thank you to everyone. Have a great day.